So good afternoon, everyone who is here in Saudi Arabia. My name is Bia Barbosa. I'm a journalist and member of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee. Actually, I'm going to moderate this workshop, and thank you for everyone for coming in the place of Rafael Evangelista, who was supposed to be here but had problems getting into the country because of visa issue. But thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for the people that with us here in the room as well. So welcome to the Big Techs and Journalism Disputes and Regulatory Models workshop. The idea of today is to have a open debate on what are the alternatives to promote journalism sustainability in the digital era, and what can we learn from regulatory endeavors on the remuneration of journalism by digital platforms across different countries. In a brief introduction, I would like to share with you that the demand for a fair remuneration from digital platforms in favor of journalists or news companies is not new. It's a tension that has deepened since the prominence of large information platforms and the rise of communication mediated by social media. The exponential growth of digital platforms transformed the digital advertising ecosystem. Their business models based on data collection and analysis for the purpose of targeting advertising has profoundly impacted contemporary journalism, and the systematic shift of revenue from journalism to digital platforms reshaped the landscape of media consumption, production, and distribution. These transformations not only alter the circulation of journalistic content, but also exacerbate power imbalances, potentially widening the gap between those with access to quality, reliable, and diverse information and those without. This is particularly evident in crises such as those surrounding public health and political electoral communications. At the core of these concerns lies the question of how journalism is compensated by digital platforms, igniting a wave of regulatory proposals across many nations and mobilizing multiple stakeholders. Australia, notably, passed a pioneering legislation addressing this issue. In Canada, the approval of the Online News Act prompted Meta to remove news from their platforms. A decree has been issued in Indonesia, while South Africa is currently conducting an inquiry on digital platforms markets. In Brazil, from where I come from, since 2021, two proposals have been at the forefront of the debate: the determination in law of the obligation of digital platforms to negotiate with journalism companies and the approval of a public sector fund financed by digital platforms. Although these proposals do not necessarily contradict each other, the idea of a fund is defended as an alternative to the direct bargaining model and not as its complement by many actors. At the international level, regulatory initiatives have been the subject of years of negotiations involving not only the executive and legislative branches, but also the judiciary. In addition to the state actors, a myriad of other actors are taking part in the debates: digital platforms, media companies, researchers, journalists, civil society organizations, and international bodies. Last year, the Content and Cultural Goods Chamber of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee published a study entitled Remuneration of Journalism by Digital Platforms, in which we mapped out 5 controversies on the subject. The first one is who should benefit? In other words, what should be the scope of any legislation regarding remuneration of journalism by platforms? The trend in legislative proposals has been to create minimal criteria for designating potential beneficiaries, such as the number of employees or media turnover. However, these criteria have been criticized because they potentially exclude individuals or small business. For some, journalists themselves should be paid directly, and for others, this is unfeasible. The second is a controversy: is who should pay? The journalism remuneration proposals we have mapped use a different terminology to define the actor responsible for this remuneration: digital platforms in Australia, online content sharing services providers in European Union, platforms and digital news intermediary companies like in Canada. In Brazil, the bill on platforms regulation used the terminology of social media providers, search engines, and instant message services. A third issue, pay for what? The understanding of what journalistic content is changed greatly. For example, in a report published by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 2021, it defines news as information or commentary on contemporary issues, explicitly excluding entertainment news. However, this is a narrow view that can be interpreted from some of the regulatory initiatives analyzed in our report. And in addition, an important part of content made available by media and which generates high levels of engagement on social media platforms refers to sports and entertainment. This controversy is also related to the content of voluntary agreements between platforms and journalism companies, negotiated without the intermediation of a public authority. The guarantee of confidentiality of these commercial agreements prevents the evaluation of the criteria used to remunerate journalism and its impact. Therefore, there is concern that the use of quantitative criteria, such as the number of publications, will serve as an incentive to reduce the quality of the content produced. The fourth controversy highlighted is related to the demand for more transparency in the work of the platforms, whether in relation to digital advertising revenue or the algorithms used in the content recommendation systems for users. So, remuneration based on what data? And finally, what should the role of the state be? To what extent should the state interfere in relations between journalistic content producers and digital platforms? The Australian code left a wide margin for these actors to negotiate on their own. However, there is no consensus on whether this is the best model, even considering some specifics in countries like Brazil, where free negotiation between the parties can result in an even greater concentration of resources and power in a small numbers of players. The idea of a public sector fund financed by digital platforms and managed in a participatory way is based on a more proactive and broader vision of the whole of the state. And in this case, decisions about the beneficiaries of the initiative would be part of the construction of public policies to support journalism. So much to discuss about. Our workshop session will be divided into three parts. The first will consist of speakers exposing your views and policy experience. The second, the idea is to have a short debate among different perspectives raised by you, by the speakers, and the last one will be devoted to Q&A, and you would very much like to talk to our colleagues here in the room and on the online room at Zoom as well. So I think we could, I'm going to present you, not all of you right now, but one at the time that you are going to speak. I think that we could start with Eva Nenadik. Eva studies media pluralism in the context of content curation, ranking, and moderation policies of online platforms, democratic implications such policies may have, and related regulatory interventions. At the European University Institute Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom. She has been involved in designating and implementation of the Media Pluralism Monitor. So Eva, thank you very much for being with us, and it would be great if you could present your thought on information pluralism online. Thank you very much. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you very much for having me. I will try to stick to 8 minutes. I will also try to be maybe a bit briefer so that we have more time for exchange. And indeed, I kind of apologize in advance because my view may be a bit more Eurocentric, because this is the main area that we focus on, being a research center on media pluralism at the European University Institute, and running the Media Pluralism Monitor in all EU member states and in candidate countries. So candidates for EU membership. But of course, we do regularly exchange with our colleagues and our partners in South America, in Australia, in the US, and all over the globe to understand. Basically, the focus of our work is on the health of the information system. And the way we understand media pluralism as a concept is perhaps a little bit different than this concept is understood in the US or in Australia or in other parts of the world, because when we speak about media pluralism, we don't speak just about the competition in the market, so market dimension of this, but we are speaking about wider enabling environment for journalism and for media, which are enablers of freedom of expression somehow. So we are looking at fundamental rights protection, such as access to information, freedom of expression, both in regulatory framework, but also in practice, the role of relevant authorities, status and safety of journalists, including digital safety, is an important aspect of media pluralism, as well as social inclusiveness or representativeness of different social groups, not only in media content, but also in management structures, and not only of media, but increasingly also of digital companies or big tech, however, whichever terminology we want to use. And then there is this element of political independence or political power. And so our work very much revolves around the concept of power. So the way we approach, we understand media pluralism, and the way we regulate somehow in Europe to protect media pluralism is to somehow curb or limit opinion centralization or concentration of opinion forming power. And this is how we've been doing this for the media world that we had in the past. Of course, we are still not there when it comes to platforms, but I think it's quite obvious, and probably not just from this conversation, that the opinion forming power has increasingly shifted from the media, if it's even still with the media, to online platforms or digital intermediaries. So we live in an information environment in which digital platforms largely excluded, so big technology companies largely excluded from liability and accountability, actually do have power over shaping our information systems and do have power over the distribution of media and journalistic content that does have, so media, unlike digital platforms, do have liability over the content they produce and they publish. So what we are seeing somehow is a profound paradigm shift where, as I said, technology companies are becoming or have become, in many instances, especially for certain demographics, the key infrastructures where people actually engage with news and information that can affect and shape their political opinion. And so they have tremendous power, but very little responsibility in respect to that. And so, because the focus of our today conversation is on the economic side somehow, or the economic implications, I will focus a little bit more on that, or this relationship between big tech and journalism in economic terms. But I think it's really important to emphasize somehow that also in the economic terms, this rise in centrality of platforms has led to disintegration of news production, which is very costly, especially if you think of analytical and investigative journalism and quality reporting in general, from distribution, which is kind of cheap. It's easy and it's cheap nowadays to distribute the content and then benefit or monetize on that. And it's also disintegrated from advertising because the platforms have positioned really as intermediaries between the media or journalism and their audiences, and also between the media and advertisers. And we know that traditionally, the business model of media, or the business model, was developed as two-sided markets. So providing news to audiences or even charging them through forms of subscription or paying for newspapers and similar, and then selling the attention of audiences to advertisers. And now both sides of this market, or of this, both sides have been disrupted or controlled somehow, are controlled by the digital platforms or big tech. And in the multi-sided market of big tech companies, the media are just one component of this value chain. So I think this is also something important to keep in mind. And I think you opened with a relatively strong focus on online platforms, digital platforms, but I think what's also important to introduce into this conversation is also the increasingly relevant role of generative AI companies, who are extensively using media content to train their models and to generate outputs, very often separating the content from the source, so diluting the visibility of media brands, which has an implications, again, for the economic sustainability of the media. And again, we in that environment, we as well have negotiations, or at least attempts of negotiations, or establishing sort of level playing field, which is very difficult to establish, right? Because of tremendous imbalances in power between the tech side and the media side. But I think this dimension is also very, very relevant, very important to look at. And two last points I want to make. One is about thinking about the power of big tech in relation to media. So they decide whether they want to carry media content or journalism at all. And we've seen, especially with these attempts of regulation, for example, you mentioned the news bargaining code in Australia, you mentioned the initiatives in Brazil, in India, in South Africa, in Canada, in the US, especially in California, which is a very interesting case of trying to establish frameworks for negotiation or fair remuneration that should go from big tech to the media. And this is not easy because, again, there is tremendous imbalance in power. And what we've seen with the Australian example, that is the most advanced one, is that now there is a backsliding somehow. Because now, when there is recently, Australia published a revision of the effectiveness somehow of this framework for negotiations that suggests that it's not as strong enough to kind of ensure sustainability of this approach, because we've seen with the major platforms that they're withdrawing. They don't want to renegotiate new deals. They don't want to expand on these deals to include more local media, for example. So it again suggests that the power is still with platforms, the power is still with big tech. And so very often, as a response to regulatory intervention, what they do is they either threaten or they just ban news. What we've been seeing from them throughout the years is that they are segregating the news in specific tabs, for example, in specific areas on their services, on the services they provide, so that eventually they can just switch it off or shut it off. So the kind of conversation we have in Europe, and the one maybe important point to make, is that unlike Australia that went with the competition law, in Europe we focused a little bit more on copyright as a basis, as a ground for negotiations between the platforms and the media for fair remuneration. And I think this is also interesting in the conversation, why the conversation around generative AI and how to play this problem, or how to deal with this problem in that area. And we've seen a lot of issues with this, right? Because first of all, these negotiations, as you already emphasized, are somehow opaque. So we don't really know what has been negotiated, who negotiates. In some cases, in some countries, we have individual big publishers negotiating first or negotiating separately, which has an implications for media pluralism, because what the big ones negotiate sets somehow the benchmark for the other ones. And then if the big ones are negotiating and excluding the smaller ones, this really can have tremendous consequences for media pluralism or information pluralism more broadly. The big markets, of course, are much better positioned, or big languages are much better positioned to negotiate with big tech than the smaller ones. And the same applies for this tension between the publishers or the media companies and journalists, because they are, as we've seen from many examples, they're not always aligned and they're not always at the same side. So who should benefit indeed is a big question. The way we understand media and journalism is in a very, we define it in a very broad sense, trying to take into account that there is a plurality of relevant voices of reference in the contemporary information sphere that should be considered at an equal level somehow as journalists. But of course, this complicates the situation even further. And I don't know if I have any minutes left,
Sure.
or should I?
No.
Yeah, I have. Okay, good. So basically, the main point I was trying to make is that what we are seeing, what we've learned somehow from these initiatives, and mostly focusing on Australia and the copyright directive in Europe, because these two, I think, have the longest experience even though, I mean, they've been around for a couple of years, but we can reflect a little bit and look at the effectiveness of these initiatives. I think there are a lot of shortcomings somehow that are surfacing now that do show that we do not have sufficient instruments to deal with this enormous and even growing power of big tech, that the negotiation power is still on the side of platforms. So we haven't really managed to put the media at the same level to be able to negotiate equally. The problems are also on the media side. So as I said, this fragmentation between the media companies, between media and journalists, between the big and small ones, between big markets, smaller markets, big languages, smaller languages. We do have good examples here. For example, in Denmark, they decided to form a coalition and to negotiate collectively with big tech. And they are really persistent on this. So, and they're very clear about their conditions and setting their benchmarks high. I think another problem that we should consider in this conversation is the lack of clear methodology of what's the value, like what is the value and who should be calculating the value, or what is fair remuneration in this context. We have several examples or several cases where this value is calculated in a different way. So it's not clear. And of course, it's not clear from these deals because these deals, as we said already, are not transparent. And so what we are seeing increasingly in the policy framework is the shift from these bargaining or negotiation frameworks to something that is a bit more direct regulatory or policy intervention in this area. So speaking increasingly about the need, for example, to tackle the issue of the fact that platforms do have this power to decide whether they even want to carry media content or not. In Europe, for example, we have European Media Freedom Act that introduces a precedent somehow by putting forward this principle that media content is not just any other content to be found on the online platform. So they have to pay due regard to this content. And in case they want to moderate this content, they need to follow a special procedure. And I think this speaks a lot in this direction of policy conversations that are suggesting that if these platforms have indeed became key infrastructure for our relationship with news and with media and with informative content more broadly, then maybe we should consider them as public utility, and maybe there should be some must carry rules in order to make sure that the media and journalism content remains there so that they don't have power just to remove it. Or we should think of complete alternatives, so to break down these dependencies. In terms of bargaining or negotiating frameworks for fair remuneration, there's been a shift somehow, or an intention to shift this conversation, looking at the failure of these negotiation frameworks somehow, or at least their shortcomings, to something that is more direct intervention in terms of like digital text or digital levy. But then this opens a new area of questions about how do you then allocate and distribute this money, and especially taking into account that not all the states have all the necessary checks and balances to make sure that these kind of processes are not abused. So I think I said a lot, so I'll just stop here and look forward to the exchange.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivan. And we're going to for sure have time for this exchange. And you mentioned the impact for small journalistic initiatives, and then I think that is a good way to chain with Juliana Harsianti. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly your surname, because I would like very much to ask you to present your views on the impact of digital platforms on community development and the importance of journalism for these communities. So to introduce you, Juliana is a journalist and researcher from Indonesia. She has worked mostly about the influence of digital technology in developing countries, contributing, for example, to Global Voices and international online media. And I'm sure that from her perspective, they're much in common from our perspective in Brazil as well. So I give the floor to Juliana. Thank you very much for being with us. I don't know what time is there in Indonesia, but thank you for being for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Because, yeah, I'm sorry I cannot turn on the video because this is better for the sound connection.
Sure.
Thank you for the Brazilian Internet, the CGBR, to invite me to as the speaker to this important issue. Good afternoon, and good afternoon for everyone who is attending in Riyadh. This is is almost 9 p.m. here in Jakarta, but yeah, this is okay to have some discussion with colleagues about the impact of big tech in journalism. As mentioned in earlier in opening remarks, Indonesia has in early this year, Indonesia has been published some presidential decree about the regulation on for the big tech and digital platform to sharing the revenue with the publisher because the the government thinks that the presence of the digital platform in Indonesia has been disruption for the business model for the media mainstream Indonesia, and it is still on discussion between the tech company and the association journalism and the government in Indonesia whether this decree can be implemented shortly or there's some modification or some adjustment in future. But as I mentioned, but this evening I will talk about how the small media uh, take a, mostly take advantage on the digital platform, like social digital platform and social media to promote the freedom of press, to 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 the to to get the to spread the information or more variety information in Indonesia. I can give to 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 example from Indonesia is Magdalene and Project Multatuli both are the online media platform based in Indonesia. Magdalene is more about the who focus on gender issue. Meanwhile, the Project Multatuli is more focused on the in-depth journalism and this and highlighted some issue has been uh, avoided by the mainstream media in Indonesia. Uh, why they choose the online to take advantage the online platform and the digital social media because they think is about is this could reach more audience, could get they could get more engagement from the readers and uh, but not from the business side because they try to avoid to have some Google ads on their platform. Uh, they avoid to they try organically to get to establishment their website on Google rank Google search engine to keep their site still number one in the search engine. But like if I said the small medium media company or community media is has advantage has more advantage not to not to have the big revenue as the big media company, so they can do more freely to has the to promote freedom expression and uh, multi and and multilingual website, and then and can discuss more freely about the issue has been avoided by the mainstream media, and how how they get how get how they get managed the business run. Yes, they have some business model to be running. Some mostly of them get the money from the donor and then from the subscriber, not the news subscription, but mostly for the donation for the individual who has been support the platform, and they and then keep the readers who want to get the more quality journalism, and then alternative media in Indonesia. I think this is enough for my side, and then back to you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. And for sure that there are other challenges that we'll be able to exchange regarding the sustainability of small media initiatives. I think that from the Global South perspective, we still have some other challenge than the global north has regarding it, because at least from the South America and the Latin America perspective, we face the problem of the concentration of media. We have in a very few countries we have a public media that can more or less guarantee some pluralism in the media landscape in general. So I think that there are other challenges that, besides the developed countries already have regarding the sustainability of journalism, and that we are still facing the last century challenges regarding media pluralism, and then we face the news one regarding all the stress that the new form of production and distribution of content brings to us. So thank you very much for sharing your experience here in Indonesia, and I think that we can move forward with Nikhil Power. I would love to hear Nikhil on your studies on the revenue demands from big tech companies, and linking them to the legal cases against AI firms. That I think that is the good connection of what Eva brought us at the beginning, relating how the AI systems are using journalist content to train the models, and specifically in generative AI systems, but not only. And so thank you thank you very much for being here with us. I'm going to introduce you, and please feel free to to complete any information. So Nikhil is
Sure.
an Indian journalist, digital rights activist, and founder of Media Nama, a mobile and digital news portal. He has been a key commentator on stories and debates around Indian digital media companies, censorship, and internet and mobile regulation in India. And of course, studying these demands from big tech companies regarding the journalistic revenue. So thank you very much for being with us. And yeah, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for this very important discussion. I'm a journalist, and I've been a media entrepreneur from India for about 16 years now, and I've been a journalist for 18. I've also been blogging for about 21 years. I'm a part of a few key media-related committees in India that look at the impact of regulations on media, including the Media Regulation Committee of the Editors Guild of India. Um, and I come at this from an internet perspective, having built my entire career on an online platform. We're a small media company. We have about 15 people working at our media organization. Um, but I also still do believe that journalism is not the exclusive privilege of traditional media or formal journalists. Even today, news breaks on social media. And frankly, journalism I see as an act, and therefore, people who publish verified content, even on social media, are also doing journalism. So we can't really look at things purely from a mainstream media lens. And even today, there are online news channels and online podcasts that run as media businesses, online media businesses, and they're just an alternative to traditional media. The primary challenge that media companies, and especially traditional media companies, face is the shift of advertising revenue from traditional media organizations, which had restricted distribution, to digital platforms where now they face infinite competition, because everyone can report, everyone can create content. And traditional and big tech companies like Google and Facebook have built business models that rely heavily on data collection and targeted advertising, which has meant that they are competing as aggregators with the media companies on their platforms. But also, let's not forget that media companies also compete with all users on the same platforms. So the real challenge for media is of discovery. And but we also have to realize that for media businesses, and I run one, the benefit that these platforms create is that they send us traffic as well. For most media publications, a majority of their traffic uh, comes from search and social media, and they're the primary source of traffic for many news companies today, including us. Um, what's also happening, just to cover the complete situation, is that we are facing a new threat with AI summaries. What Google does on its search, uh, especially because unlike traditional search, which used to direct traffic to us, uh, AI summaries potentially cannibalize traffic. They don't send us traffic anymore. And so Google isn't just now an aggregator of links, but it is also turning out to become an answers engine. And that is a term which is used also by Perplexity, which performs the same function. Perplexity and similar RAG models for AI basically take facts from news companies and compile them into fresh articles that serve a user's need. So, in fact, a future threat for us, and that we will see play out in the next 2 to 3 years, is that apps like Perplexity, which use our content, use of facts that we report, will start cannibalizing our traffic. And all media monetizes the traffic that they have, and they rely on building a relationship with users so that they read them on a regular basis. But really, it's important to remember that if we don't get traffic, we won't be sustainable. And so, while most of this conversation has been focused on getting paid for linking out, I think that's a battle that should not be fought, because we actually benefit from uh, search engines and from social media platforms linking out to us. And if we start forcing them to pay, and they choose not to link out in order to, which is what Facebook did in Canada, it'll actually cost news companies significant revenue, because audiences will not discover them. Australia's news bargaining code as well, I feel, has set the wrong precedent, because we benefit from traffic from social media. Linking out should not be mandatorily paid. It breaks a fundamental foundational principle of the internet, where the internet is an interconnection of links. People go from link to link to link and discover, uh, new content, new innovation, new things to read. And so I think we should be very careful about forcing platforms to link out, because that is a mutually beneficial relationship. The advertising issue is frankly a function of the media not building a direct relationship with its audience. Like we've built direct relationships with our audience, um, and therefore losing out on monetization to big tech platforms. Let's not forget, platforms like The Guardian chose to sign up with Facebook for its instant articles. Effectively, while they thought they were benefiting for the traffic on Facebook, they were also giving up audience to Facebook. So I think we need to be careful, and we need to build our own direct relationships. But I want to talk a lot more about AI, because I think that's where it becomes problematic. The tricky thing with AI is that facts are not under copyright, and media companies, news reporters like us, essentially report facts, and there's copyright in how we write things, but not copyright in what we write about, because facts can't be exclusively with one news company, because that is effectively the public good is in the distribution and easy availability of facts. So Platforms like Perplexity actually take facts from us, piece it together into a news article. They take it from multiple news organizations, and they rewrite our content in a manner, to be honest, which can be much more easy to read. And they can also query the same news article on sites like Perplexity, which means that a user gets all of their answers based on our reporting on other platforms. Now, this is not copyright violation, but it is plagiarism. And unfortunately, plagiarism is not illegal, even the copyright violation is. Now, most of the cases that are being run in some in the US, some in India, based on like in the US brought out by the New York Times, in India by a news agency called ANI, focus on the fact that our content is being used, is being taken by AI and ingested by them to train their models, and therefore the likelihood of them replicating our work is very high, and that they've taken this content without a license. And I think this is an important one, um, because there isn't licensing, there isn't compensation for using our work to train them. And I'm aware that many news organizations across the world have actually signed up with AI companies uh, for revenue sharing arrangements. Now, this is a very short term perspective, and usually AI companies will do exactly what, for example, Google has done with its Google News initiative and its news showcase, where they will tie up with big media companies, and this will end up actually ensuring that smaller companies don't get any money. In case of AI, that's also what's going to happen. I'll give you a small example. When we moved our website to a new server, our website crashed because of the number of AI bots that were hitting our servers, and they were taking our content because we moved to a new server. They thought this is the new website, and so this stealing of our work is, I think, something that we need to look at from legislation, from courts to address. Um, and there needs to be regulation around copyright and AI. And the outcome of legal battles happening in the US with New York Times, as well as India with ANI, is going to set very important legal frameworks for regulators as well. And no one wants to talk about copyright. No one wants to touch the copyright issue because there's a uneasy tension amongst countries, that there's a geopolitical battle going on right now about who comes on top in the AI race. And they realize that for large language models, they need more and more written content, and and written facts, and a large repository of that lies with news organizations. So while today we are trying to fight battles related to linking out, which I think is a battle that shouldn't be fought, because linking out, like I said, is a fundamental foundational principle of the internet. The battle that we need to fight, and we need to fight it early, is the battle to ensure that we get compensated for content being used by AI companies, or they need to essentially remove our content from their databases. That's the battle that I see only in courts, but not in case of legislators. And these legal frameworks are going to be very, very important to develop, because we need to create incentives for reporters to report, for news organizations to publish, because let's face the facts. What the content that AI companies generate is based on our work, and so if we don't do more original work, if we don't get incentivized to create original work, and media companies start dying, effectively they will have nothing to build on top of. So I think this is the relationship in terms of revenue relationships that regulation needs to address. And like I said multiple times, I strongly feel that the idea of paying for links is flawed. And what's happened in Canada and what's happened in Australia um, is the wrong approach. Media companies are companies as well. They need to figure out mechanisms for monetization. they are moved from an environment of limited competition in traditional media to infinite competition in digital media, and they need to adapt to that change, not try and get pittance from big tech firms. They should be competing with big tech firms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nahiri. And I think that you brought us a very challenge perspective regarding because we didn't manage so far to solve the challenge related to journalist content used by platforms, by the aggregators, by the news aggregators, and now you're facing already the AI training systems using journalist content. I would like to take advantage to ask you something. Here in Brazil, there is a bill on artificial intelligence regulation that has just passed at the Senate. We still have the Chamber of Deputies to move forward and to have the approval of the bill, but it provides that the copyright payment for journalist content using trainings and the response for the AI system as well. Do you think that this could be even considering there is a copyright approach, that it could be interesting for solving at least this kind of problem that you mentioned? I would like to hear from you a little bit, since we are checking and all the perspectives that are on the table in different parts of the world to tackle this issue.
No, I think that if it's legislated that there needs to be compensation for copyright, for usage of copyright content, that is the correct approach. It's just that once you've agreed that there should be compensation, the question becomes who gets compensated and how much do they get compensated. What is the frequency at which they get compensated? Do you, for example, get paid for an entire data dump being given, or do you get compensated on the basis of how it is used? In which case, how do you validate that your content is actually being used by AI? Because even Europe is struggling with algorithmic accountability. And by the way, on the linking out part, I don't think, while I've said that there shouldn't be a revenue share mechanism there, I do believe that we need algorithmic accountability for both social media as well as search to ensure that there is no discrimination happening in terms of surfacing our content. And as a small media owner, I don't want someone else like them to benefit big media or traditional media at my expense. So the fairness principles also need to be taken into consideration in the same way that fairness needs to be taken into consideration in case of the law in Brazil. But the question you have to ask is, who is media today? How do you identify that this organization, that you're actually supporting journalism? Because like I said at the beginning, journalism is not the exclusive privilege of just journalists today, right? I'm a blogger who started a media company. So I understand that bloggers also make money from advertising, and to that extent, they don't get compensated. So why should I be, as a blogger, different from a media company? I'm also running my own venture, right? So we are seeing an infinite ability for reporting today because anyone can report. And in that scenario, who gets compensated, who doesn't, becomes even trickier. If you're scraping a media publication's blog, I mean, a media publication, shouldn't a blogger also get compensated if it's being scraped for AI is a question. Why or why not, right? So these are not easy answers. I don't even know if there are answers to some of these questions. But when you're looking at defining laws, you have to create that differentiation. You have to break it up into who benefits and who doesn't benefit from that regulation. If you look at most podcasters, they are doing they're doing opinion journalism in a sense, right? They are carrying opinions. They are conducting interviews. Would you treat them as journalists under this law as well? So transcripts, if they are being aggregated by AI, should they be compensated for that as well? Where do you draw the line? And that's the problem with laws. You don't know. It's very tricky to draw the lines in these cases.
Yeah, and besides the law, I think that in countries where you don't have a democratic regulator to to analyze how this kind of laws are being implemented, it gives us a even more challenging way to deal with. I don't know if Eva or Juliana want to comment on that or any other aspect. Eva, I would like to ask you if you could comment as well. Besides anything else that you wanted to bring us, to ask you to tell us a little bit about this coalition that you mentioned in Denmark, that the media established to negotiate it, to collectively negotiate with the platforms, with digital platforms, because one of the issues that we had here in Brazil as well, in the platforms regulation bill, that would, if it was approved, now it's stuck on the Chamber of Deputies, was to compensate. It was not based on copyright, but it was based on the content use of journalist content, how to negotiate for this, how it would be possible for the small initiatives to do that. There's already some digital journalism association in Brazil that try to represent the most part of these small initiatives, but they don't manage to represent all of them. And how this coalition is working on Denmark that you mentioned, I felt that would be interesting to go a little bit deeper. But if you want to dive on this AI topic as well, please feel free.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start with the last point. I think Nikhil said many super interesting and relevant things. I want to stay for a second with this last point of the complexity we have to define media and journalism today. And this is indeed one of the key obstacles of all the not only regulatory attempts, but also, soft policy measures that we want to implement in this area. Because it's the first step, it's the foundation somehow. Who do we consider as a journalist? Who should benefit from these frameworks and who shouldn't? Like how far can we stretch this? We've been doing a lot of work within the EU, but also Council of Europe that covers much more countries in Europe. And the Council of Europe has put forward some recommendations on how to define media and journalism in this new information world or information sphere we live in. And it takes a very broad approach, right? Because it's the freedom of expression that is at stake. So it's one of the key principles somehow that we nurture in Europe, the fact that the profession should be open and inclusive. And so if this is the principle, how do we solve these practical obstacles? Because we do see a lot of paradoxes of the information systems nowadays, right? The more open the debate somehow is, the more demagoguery, the more misinformation we have. So we have, in a way, we have plurality of voices in the news and information ecosystem, but not all of these voices are actually benefiting our democratic needs, right? Because many of these voices are actually misleading, or are extremely biased, or are not professional, not respecting ethical and professional principles, and so on. So creating a lot of disorder in the information system that confuses people, distorts trust, and has a lot of negative implications for our democratic systems. I can give one example that I'm not saying is a good solution, but maybe is a good starting point to look at on how to solve this problem. And this is something that has been heavily discussed within the negotiations around the European Media Freedom Act, that does provide this special treatment to media service providers, including journalists, in content moderation by major online platforms, so very large online platforms. We define them as those that have more than 10% of EU population as regular users, so around 45 million of people are using them on a regular basis, monthly users. And so in listing the criteria on, first of all, the law provides a definition which is very broad about media service providers, but listing the criteria on who are the media or journalists that can or should benefit from this special treatment, there is for the first time in EU law, we have a mention of self-regulation. And we have an explicit reference to the respect of professional standards. So the law, and now I don't recall exactly the text, but it says that those media who comply to national laws and regulation, but also comply to widely recognized self-regulatory or co-regulatory frameworks are entitled to benefit from this. And of course, this can also be, misused, abused. You can form an association of journalists that promotes wrong standards and claim that this is widely acknowledged framework. If, I don't know, they have a certain number of media within their umbrella. But I think there is something in that. I think we need to find a way to revive somehow self-regulation, respect of professional standards and ethical principles for different voices in the information sphere. And we can start from traditional journalistic principles, but these, of course, they can also evolve for the new needs. And another thing I think that is useful for this kind of conversation from that example is the transparency of the media who benefit from this. So this was, we were battling heavily somehow to have this clause explicitly mentioned in the legal text. So the requirement that the media who benefit, who self-declare as media, are transparent, that this list is easily accessible for everyone to review, so to civil society and to academia, to make sure that bad actors are not misusing or abusing this legal provision. So I think there is something to look into there. On generative AI, I think this is a very relevant conversation. And again, I would agree with Nikhil that this is a new battlefield somehow. We haven't resolved the old one. We haven't resolved the old risks to media pluralism, so the political influences and so on, and even safety issues to journalists. And we've moved to the area of digital platforms. So these two battles were fought in parallel. And now we have also generative AI that is profoundly disrupting the information sphere. And I think the biggest change that is happening with generative AI is that we are moving from fragmentation of the public sphere that we had with digital platforms to what we call an audience of one. So this is extreme personalization of interaction between an individual and the content that this individual is exposed to and is generated by these models, these statistical models and systems that we don't really know how they operate because, of course, there is a lack of transparency, there is a lack of accountability. We are not really sure what kind of data are they trained. There are a lot of issues with the data that they're trained of in terms of biases, lack of representativeness, and so on. So we are seeing, for example, cases such as the Iceland. So the Iceland as a state strategically decided that it's important for them and for the AI future in which we are entering for their language and their culture to be represented. So they willingly gave all they have in the digital data world for free to OpenAI, just to be represented in those models because they saw this as a priority, right? And then on the other hand, unlike the New York Times case, where the New York Times is suing OpenAI for the breach of copyright because they use their content without license or without agreement, what we're seeing in Europe is that the publishers, especially the major ones, such as Le Monde, Axel Springer, El País in Spain, and similar, are making deals with these companies. Deals that are opaque, so we don't know what these deals are. But for example, the CEO of Le Monde said that it's a game-changing deal for them as one publisher, one media company. But this is probably not the best way forward because it's fragmenting and weakening the position of publishers and weakening even further position of smaller publishers and journalists and so on. So I think in this context, the Danish model is a very interesting one because they started from, I think it's a trade union, but I would need to double check this, whether it's a professional association or a trade union, but it was an existing organization of journalists in the country who decided that the best approach is to go for collective negotiations with big tech because this will make them stronger. And they also decided to use all the legal instruments and regulatory frameworks that are in place in Europe to make their position stronger. So to ally somehow with the political power in the country to back them in this fight against big tech giants. And we think, of course, this battle is ongoing. There are back and forth. So sometimes they manage to progress, and then there is a backlash from big tech. So this is a very early stage, very fresh, but it's, I think, a very interesting and relevant case to observe to see how things can or should be done. Because I do believe that one of the lessons learned from the existing negotiation frameworks was that this fragmentation doesn't really serve journalists and media. So a collective approach is probably a better one, and we are seeing much more happening on that end. So news media organizations coming together and finally starting to understand that they are stronger if they do this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eva. And just for the record, I would like to mention that we, as the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, we try to invite Google and Meta representatives for this for this conversation here, but we didn't manage to convince them to come, which usually happens in different occasions. So I see that Nikhil and Juliana have raised their hands. I just would like to check if there anyone online asking any questions or not. So, Nikhil, do you mind if I give the floor to Juliana before? Please,
Of course,
Juliana.
please go ahead. I've said quite a bit already.
Please, Juliana.
Okay. I think our discussion has moved from the digital platform to AI, which is become the major our concern on the journalism in Indonesia. In Indonesia, the generative AI, especially large language model, not only threatened as the copyright, as the Nikhil mentioned and the Eva mentioned, but also threaten the work of journalism itself, because the journalists start to generate the news by using the ChatGPT, for example, or another large language model, and then they just do some edit for the news, and then they publish it on their news on their news sites. This is the problem. Not the problem. Is the procedure is on the still on debate on the people who media company and association journalism, because they still think is good or ethical to has generated the news or and publish, or they can use the large language model generative AI to just find the news for the sourcing for the news, and then they have to writing by themselves, and then just publish and then publish to the as it is as their news as the news article on the media. The problem with the regulation is yes, I think we need the regulation by the state or the government, but the problem with regulation is still need time to discuss on to produce the regulation by the government. Meanwhile, the technology is running fast. When the government has the publish the regulation on generative AI, maybe we already has the chat GPT for the news series, which is the has ability more than chat GPT in we know for the moment. Well, what we think we should be we should be done is the association, which is this is not only in journalism but also in creative media. So the journalist association and then creative people association has joined force to discuss, which is that have they will create the ground regulation, not to as the rule for how to do and how to not to be done by the generative AI to the for their work. Is this yeah? I think this is more than ethical than the regulation, and for the moment they think this is enough. But I think we need the more stronger regulation who has the law enforcement to overcome the impact of generative AI in journalism and then creative work. So back to you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Nikhil, please.
Thanks. I'll just respond to one thing that Juliana said. While we want strong regulation of AI, I think it's going to be very difficult to get because geopolitically, what's happening is that the EU is being looked at too strong a regulatory player, and then countries are afraid that they will lose out on innovation and on the AI battle. So, at least in India, from what I can see, there is a lot of pressure to not regulate AI.
Yeah, this was the
Uh,
opposition in the Brazilian parliament as well. If you
it's
strong
going to
regulate,
continue.
yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. The other thing to look at is that instead of, and just responding to Eva, I think one way of treating, ensuring that media owners get enough compensation is to not get compensation only for media owners. If anybody's copyrighted content, whether it's musicians or it's authors or it's media owners like us, if our work has been used for training models, and we should get compensated. I had a conversation with a lawyer a few months ago who said that um, AI ingesting our content is like any person reading it because when they're giving an output, it's not the exact same thing. It's their understanding of our content. I would actually say that the power law applies over here. The ability of AI to ingest vast amount of our content from across the globe is far greater, and so therefore there needs to be protection for creators, and that creator could be of any kind: media, movies, books, anything, right? Um, I would also say that there are other mechanisms of where AI does need to be regulated, like there has to be regulation for data protection. Um, Eva mentioned bias, and I think bias is the trickiest one to regulate uh, because it's about how one sees the world, and perhaps there is plurality of AI systems that needs to come in order to ensure that representation is of different kinds, just like bias exists in society. On the New York Times case, I'll be surprised if there's a verdict because we shouldn't forget that New York Times filed a case against OpenAI after negotiations for compensation failed. And I would be surprised if OpenAI doesn't find a way of compensating New York Times and settling out of court because they would not want a verdict because their content has been ingested by OpenAI. There is one additional challenge that comes in, which is that this could be a systematic usage for research purposes. So AI is trying to position ingesting our content as a mechanism for research, A- and there can be exceptions in some countries to copyright for research purposes. So this is another challenge that I think that they're faced with. But a fourth thing that's emerging now over a period of time that I'm seeing, and I talk to a lot of AI founders, is that the usage of synthetic data, which is data generated by AI itself, is also coming into the mix to the where in the future content may not be needed for large language models because they're already trained on existing content. In that case, if it's a compensation that we are paid for future uses as well, that may no longer exist. Because let's face it, these are language models, they are not necessarily fact models. Anyone who relies on AI for fact is probably going to get something or the other wrong, and it's going to become problematic. So I still feel that media does have an opportunity in its factual accuracy going into the future, where AI will always fail because its outputs are probabilistic in nature. I know I'm not answering many things because this is still uncharted territory. This is still evolving as we speak. Um, but we need to take all of these factors into account. Thank you.
Of course, and I think that there's another topic that we didn't mention today here is that I think that for the journalistic community, it's interesting to have journalist content training somehow AI systems. Otherwise, the results of these AI systems are going to bring us are not at least are information that we cannot trust at the end. So it's important to have journalist content, I think, that being used by AI system, but I think that the way it's going to be used in a fair way, in a compensative way, or dealing with copyright issues, but I think that for us who support the integrity of information online, it's important to have at least some journalist content being considered as the training of these systems. I see that Eva has raised her hand. We just approaching to the final of our session. I would like to ask you to I'm going to give you the floor once for each one of you, and I just asking you to give to bring your final comments to this topic. Thank you again for being with us. So we can start with you, Eva. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's probably just the beginning of conversation, but it's excellent to have this conversation at such a global scale and exchange, because I think this is crucial to move us forward, to do more of exchanges like this. I just wanted, maybe, I won't conclude with anything because it's very difficult to, give final remarks on any of this because it's all open questions somehow, but I would like to put one more consideration forward. And that's the fact that we haven't really seen. So what we see from a lot of surveys is that the trust in journalism is declining. And for example, the latest Reuters News report is suggesting that people see journalists as drivers of polarization. So why is this the case? Has not been reflected enough within the profession itself. And of course, there are multiple reasons for this. And there is also like very strong smear and negative campaigns by politicians against journalists who, of course, want to disregard or undermine the credibility of the profession because then it works better for them, right? But I think what we are not seeing sufficiently is this sort of self-reflection. So where have we failed as a profession, especially in this aspect of like reconnecting with youth, with young audiences, because clearly there is a gap there. So young people are departing from the media in traditional sense. They are departing from journalism in traditional sense. And journalists somehow are ignoring this fact. We don't see enough self-reflection on that side. And then there is also this question of creating value for audiences. I don't think that media and journalism in traditional sense is investing enough in this. So there is this obsession or a demand somehow that journalism and media should be treated as a public good, and I do strongly support this idea that media and journalism, when professional, when ethical, are definitely public good and should also be supported by public subsidies in a way that is transparent and fair and contributes media pluralism. But at the same time, there has to be a bit more self-reflection and incentives or initiatives coming from within the profession. And at the moment, what we're seeing is a lot of complaints, like we are captured by platforms, we are being destroyed by platforms, we need a help. But what is actually the value that journalism has to offer to the people has been pushed aside or forgotten a little bit. So I think this would probably be the best case for journalism to kind of revive or remind us of what this value actually is and how can they create value with these new tools and technologies that are on disposal to everyone, including to media and journalism. I think that would make a stronger case for why should people go back to journalism and media and support them more.
Thank you very much, Eva. Juliana, please, besides it gets 10 o'clock in Jakarta.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree what Eva said. We cannot make the conclusion for our discussion because this kind of discussion is still to be continued in the future. And then it needs to be it needs to be regular conversation, either in in region is in developed country or developing country, in global south or global north, because it is important for journalists to create the new form in this digital platform, how to deal with the big tech, how to deal with the generative AI, and how to create to keep the ethic within the journalist in the middle of the influence of digital platform and the generative AI, who has been challenging their work and then the business model of the media company. Yeah, the conversation will be yeah, ISIS, the conversation will be has impacted to the policy, either to the nation state policy or to to within the association, either association journalism and the media company in regional or the in nation states. So it will be have the better environment for journalism who keep creating and then keep survive in this digital era. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Nikhil, please, your final remarks.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. It's been a great conversation. I'm both a journalist and an entrepreneur, and I am a capitalist in how I work, but I do that ethically. I do feel that as media, we have to find our own business models rather than relying on subsidies and government support and um, anything from the government, to be honest. Because anytime, and I feel this strongly, the government comes into this into a tripartite relationship with government, media, and big tech, um, two things happen. Governments use the funds, and it might be different in Europe, but in the global South, governments use funds as a mechanism for influencing the media. And secondly, if the media pushes for them to regulate big tech, then government creates regulations over big tech and uses that as a mechanism to regulate free speech. So, to be honest, in this relationship, I don't want the government in there because it has an impact on democracy, has an impact on media freedom, whether directly or indirectly, whenever you have governments involved. I'd rather that we figure out our own business models. And if there has to be regulation, it has to be uh, applicable across society, not specific to the media. I don't feel we need special treatment, and I don't feel that we should have special treatment. Uh, we have to adapt as times change. We have to adapt from when we move from traditional business models to online business models, from online to AI. But at the same time, if someone's stealing our content, we need we need to go to court to protect our rights in a sense, right? So I strongly believe that I don't want government in the picture, and we don't need protection. We need to fight our own battles, and we need to innovate on our own. For far too long, we've allowed all the innovation to center around big techs, when we've had the same opportunity to build audience relationships. And I don't think this is, expecting regulation and laws and policies to support us is going to solve the problem for us. I know this is antithetical to what this conversation has been about, but that's the way how I run my media business. Thank you.
And of course, there's one thing that is government, another thing is the state role that we brought at the beginning in our conversation. That's one of the controversies that we had mapped in this report that we published here by the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee. I totally agree with the risk that we have when governments regulate freedom of expression issues or regulate technology that's related to freedom of expression. But I also agree that we have to search for some kind of balance between big companies, and in countries like mine in Brazil, where you have the big national companies, media, national companies and the global big tax, the public gets in the middle, the citizens get in the middle, and the state has a role to play as well to bring at least more balance to the conversation. But of course, it's not only governments that can bring this balance. We have the judiciary, we have independent regulatory bodies, so there are other alternatives that I think that we have to put on the table to try to find some solutions that respect our specificities in each of the countries that we discussing this kind of problem, but also in a global perspective, because we are dealing with global companies that in maybe some achievements that we may had in some countries may help us to deal with that in other realities. From the global South perspective, I think that we can learn a lot from other countries that are tackling this problem. So once again, thank you very much for your time, your insightful thoughts, and for spending some time with us here at the IGF. To start this conversation, as you mentioned, it's only the beginning, and from the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee perspective, I would like to thank you very much, and to make us available for any kind of further exchange that we might have, and have you all, who everybody's listening or here, and for those who are here with us, a good evening. Thank you very much. Bye.